This is the Dallas Morning News.
This episode is from an independent podcast hosted by the Dallas Morning News Opinion Team.
Fred Perpall, corporate CEO, president of the USGA, told some great stories back and forth, but what I walked away with were the leadership lessons.
Yeah, well, he's an innovator and a builder. He's a man that came from the Bahamas, and he came over and played basketball at UTA, and then ultimately has become CEO of the Beck Group, a leading construction firm in the United States. I also think what we really touched on was his leadership inside the game of golf, and he just started playing golf about 12 years ago. So pretty amazing to see him rise to the executive committee and then ultimately president of the USGA.
But it's that passion and the drive and the work ethic that comes out through the entire hour plus.
Yeah, he really focuses on how his life is all one thing. Work, personal, kids, golf, Beck Group. It's all intertwined, and I think that's a great life lesson for the younger audience.
And we've been told too long that you bifurcate everything.
Exactly.
He's a great lesson that you got one life.
You got it. Tune in. Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom?
We're going to have a fun conversation today. Fred Perpall, great background, immigrant from the Bahamas, education in the United States, corporate career that's led to a CEO position, but then also put back in the community in terms of responsibilities as the president of the USGA. We've got a lot to cover. First thing, though, I do want to apologize for Kyle and the overt journalistic lack of focus on his attire today with the U.S. Open.
Hey, I did attend this event, and this was one of the best, I think, piece of clothing they had.
There's nothing you can say that's going to make you back even.
It's okay, though.
Yeah, you're still two down.
I am.
Walking up to the...
Well, that was my first U.S. Open as USGA president, so it's actually a pretty nice homage.
There you go.
Look at that. Yeah, it's worked out. That's the problem. Fred, let's start with the background. As I mentioned, immigrant from the Bahamas. Walk us through, because golf wasn't a focal point, but architecture was a focal point early on in your career.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Bahamas until I was 17. When right before I turned 18, I moved to the United States to attend University of Texas at Arlington. Really with the notion, from I was 12 years old, I wanted to be an architect. And it was the best architecture school that I thought I could also, walk on and play basketball. And so that's kind of what brought me to North Texas. And what a gift, because I think there's a role for luck in life, and coming to North Texas in 1993, right as we were exploding or in the middle of some explosive growth, has just been a gift to my life. But I grew up in the Bahamas. My mom was a ninth grade educated cook. She worked at a country club. My dad was an airline avionics technician. He was gone a lot because that was a very demanding job. We had a sort of lower middle class background, grew up in an inner city neighborhood, and just all my life I wanted to be involved with the building business because it was the first job I ever got at 12 years old.
But now golf wasn't a focus, but golf did have a big play in terms of providing the foundation for an education that allowed you to get into architecture.
Yeah, I like to tell a story. Long before I was a golfer, golf was changing my life because my mom worked at this wonderful club in the summertime. She had her own business, but in the summertime, to relieve the staff, she would be the summertime cook at the Life for Key Club. And she'd come home every day talking about these golfers, Mr. So-and-so who did such and such. And these folks were from all around the world, but they came to our small little island. That was their place. And she would come home and she'd never talk down these members. She would always talk them up. You can't believe Mr. So-and-so is in the shipping business and Mr. such and such is in the, garment business. And, I would just have all these inspiring stories about these members she would meet. But I didn't know she was going to the club and she was talking me up too. And so one day she came home and said, Mr. Kelty would like you to come down and have breakfast with him on a Saturday. And I was like, wow. And, so I always tell the story, I put on my Sunday best. If you grew up in the inner city, you know what that means. That means that's that one outfit you only wear on Sundays. And I went down, and I'll never forget, when those gates opened and we drove down the tree-lined streets. And
was that the first time you got?
First time I ever went to a private club, and my mom had been working there for a few summers, and I just couldn't believe an environment so perfect and so idyllic was just 20 minutes from where I lived, the other side of the track, so to speak. And, Mr. Kelty sat me down and he said, your mom's been telling us how good of an athlete and good a student you are. And at Lifeward Key, we've established this scholarship through our Lifeward Key Foundation, to help kids like you from the community go to college. And, your mom's been taking care of us and, we'd like you to be one of those kids. And, what a gift. Because my parents probably didn't have all of the funds to get me all the way there. And this became a wonderful sort of trampoline in my life. And so I think, it's been probably a big part of the theme of my life. When you have a lot, you sort of have a opportunity, but also responsibility to give a lot. And I think the folks at Lifeward Key, I always like to give them their props, but that was my first demonstration to see how this wonderful game of golf could have such an impact in the lives of people, because it certainly had an impact in my life at a very young age.
I was raised by a single mom, and she didn't have many resources either. As you described kind of going through those gates to what was a completely different world, 20 minutes, but worlds apart, that had to have been tugging emotions, though. Clearly, a lot came out of that in terms of education, but you're also exposed to a world that was very different than yours, that had a lot when you and your family didn't. Yeah.
It's interesting because today in America, we talk so much about the things that separate us instead of the things that unite us. I remember, I still think back to 16-year-old me. I never thought ill of the people who had accumulated such success. In fact, it was inspirational. Like you drive around there and you said, boy, what does it take to live like this? And what I admire most is those folks didn't treat me like someone they looked down on. They treated me like someone they wanted, to share their life with. So my first internship in high school came from this group of people. Every Christmas, every summer, invitations to homes and to Christmas parties and to really just be, in the experience and to be mentored and to share. I think golf gives us this great opportunity actually to walk shoulder to shoulder. And all of us who love golf know that when we're in the game of golf, everything that's different about us just fades away and our common, sort of humanity unites. And, I got a dose of that long before I ever picked up golf clubs. And so when I think back to that, I think, like, how nice is it when you're a young person that people who have a lot have opened the gates, but also opened their arms to kind of share their life with you. And, I think if you can see it, you can be it. And that was the ultimate gift, to be able to see a life that was very different from mine, but to make that life feel like a life that I could actually earn for myself.
Well, and two lessons there. One is a lot of life is attitude.
Yeah.
If you had had a very different attitude, it may have played out very differently. And the second aspect is, I wonder how many of those people, 30 years later would trade places with you right now.
Well, I don't know.
Seeing what you've achieved from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the people that we interact with are not what they end up being in life. It shows the potential of people.
Yeah. I mean, I think, across these boundaries, I always joke in Dallas, being sort of a black leader, on Saturdays, you still got to get your hair cut. And if you live in Dallas, invariably the best barbershops are going to be in the neighborhood. And I always joke with my friends at Dallas Country Club, like, there's only one of us that eat breakfast at Dallas Country Club on, Saturday morning and then drive down to 67 and Keys to get their haircut. And what I've noticed in this life that I think is also reflected in the game, that the people sitting around the 19th hole at Dallas Country Club and the people sitting in the lobby at my barbershop, they want the same things out of life. They want security, safety. They want a better life for their children. They want to have the dignity of good jobs. They want outcomes that match their inputs. That there are good people sitting in both rooms. And I think we need more opportunities where those people can be our people. And that's what I love about golf, because when I'm walking down the fairway, I get to be my full self and I get to share my full story. And I feel just as close to my caddies as I feel to my fellow members. I feel just as strongly about, Legine that keeps our locker room as I, feel about Jonas, who's the president of the club. And so we need more opportunities as Americans to see ourselves as one people. When we're at our best, that's how we behave. And I feel like golf is this wonderful, sort of avatar in which we can be our full, community. And I believe very strongly that for me, it was not serendipitous, the life arc I've had. Like, God did not give all of this to me just for me. The notion that my mom, who's 9th grade educated, was a cook at a club, and that my life could take me in such a way to become the president of the USGA, that life experience and that story that, was given to me was meant, as an inspiration, and as a tool to help many others.
To go far behind you. Well said.
So you walk through kind of that door that morning. You have obviously a very probably life-changing breakfast, and then you make your way to UTA. Yeah. And basketball actually was really, I would say, your biggest probably sports profession at the time. I mean, you played ultimately on the Bohemian national team, et cetera. Talk me through basketball, how that impacted your life as well, and then UTA, and then ultimately moving into a working life. And how'd you get all there?
I always say, the thing about college athletics and sports as a young person, it teaches you so many wonderful things. In fact, I like to think I've built a pretty competent golf game, even though I've only picked up the game as a, adult.
So what's your handicap?
I'm a 5.2 index right now, but let's not talk too much about that. We got people on either side of that trade right now, But, I think I learned from sports discipline, organizational skills, the ability to work with others. Basketball was my first love. My mom dropped me to a basketball camp when I was 4 years old, my brother and I instantly fell in love. But we played every sport growing up. We were track athletes. I was able to represent our country as a junior national track athlete and basketball player. So for me, I always felt growing up on a small island that I would be a professional athlete. Mm-hmm. And many of my friends did go on to professional athletics in either track and field or basketball. But the wonderful gift I got at UTA, coming to a mid-major Division I school and playing against, really big-time basketball players, both in the summertime. We'd go up to TCU, we'd go to SMU. I'd scrimmage with my teammates at UTA, and I learned pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be a professional basketball player. And that also was a gift. It's like poker. The person that folds their hand first is actually the biggest winner other than the winner. The person that holds the hand all the way to the end to see the last cards is actually second place, is really the biggest loser. So I folded my hands quick in terms of professional athletics. I knew I did not want that life, but I also knew that life had a lot more for me. I was a pretty good student. I kind of went through undergrad at UTA with a perfect GPA, and then graduate school and finished top of my class in both undergrad and grad. So I had an instinct that actually there was a different calling for me. But I took a lot of that competitiveness from sports into my career. And when I joined urban architecture in 1998, I was the only, person of color. I was the only black person that also was a professional. But, think about the gift I had received by then. So now I'm 23, but at 16, I'd already been living my life with Mr. Kelty and Mr. Alexio and Mr. Moscow, all these guys in the summer. So I never felt like different from the people I was around, both in college and in my career. I felt very connected to my bosses who were invariably, middle-aged white men. I didn't feel like I was something different from them, nor did I feel like they had a life I couldn't achieve. I very much saw myself as a part of them. And so I think the gift of both having the life experience, getting to meet, all of these men at the club, being an athlete, to be able to bring the competitiveness to bear, but also something that I think young leaders need, which is a lot of self-esteem. And self-esteem is not ego. It's just seeing the best in yourself and talking yourself up. And I think those were all great tools for me early on in my career.
You talk about self-esteem. And so for the younger audience, was your mother influential? Were both your parents influential in giving you the platform to feel confident in yourself and to walk through the door and to have a seat at the table. How did that build in your early years?
Yeah, well, see, we were big church people. So I always joke with people, if I never go to church again, like I'm 50, if I never go to church again, if the average American lives to be 76 and they go to church 3 times a week throughout the majority of their life, if I never go to church again, I've still been to more church than most Americans will ever go to church. So, church was sort of this wonderful place for us, Boy Scouts, choir, all altar boys, all of these things we did around, church, was my parents' proxy for giving us, sort of public awareness around leadership, around responsibility, around interaction. So I think the self-esteem, knowing that you had parents, both my mother and father, who looked at us like we could achieve anything. And even though we didn't have a lot financially, we had a lot of love in our home, and we had parents who had a, tremendous amount of confidence in us, but also expectation. So it was very hard for me to see myself less than anyone else. And I think at times in our communities, particularly our underserved communities, what we need is, we need more positive encouragement, we need more positive self-image, and we need positive examples. And I had all that around me, even though we grew up in what you would call an underserved community. And so by the time as I got to urban architecture, one, I walked in there as the #1 graduate from UTA, both in undergrad and graduate school. 2, I had a first boss who became a mentor, who actually recruited me out of the college and became sort of a shepherd for me. And then 3, I had a tremendous work ethic. And what I would say to young people is like, you can't control everything in your life. Where you were born, the color of your skin, the shirt on your back, a lot of those things, you got to win the parenting lottery on. But you can't control your attitude and you can't control your work ethic. And I just was determined early in my career that no one was going to outwork me. And, I still have a lot of that in me today, but definitely as a 23-year-old, like if you came in on Saturday, I came in longer on Saturday. If they gave you an assignment, you did it in 3 hours, I'd do it in 2. If you would work on Sunday, I'd work on Sunday. If you were reading 1 book, I'd read 2. I just knew how to compete. Yep. And there's a part of, what we need to tell our young people that we don't talk enough about is like, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at once. And that there is no shortcut, to true sustainable accomplishment. And that everything you want that is really important to you is going to be very hard to get.
You can't have it without sacrifice.
It's gonna be hard.
Yeah. You talked about the examples. You've clearly turned into be a great example for so many people. What was it about architecture that kind of kindled that love at such a young age? Yeah.
It's really interesting because I have this thing that I talk a lot about at Beck, at our firm, that that 2 eyes create 1 sight, and so this notion that we have to live a complete life, and it's very hard if you're trying to live double lives. Like in other words, if you're trying to be the work you and then the home you, you're trying to be the casual you that hangs out on Saturday with wife and friends, and then you switch on a switch. They call this code switching in the Black community. Then I feel like I got to be a professional me. I think having the confidence to be my full self has been a real important tool throughout my whole life. First serendipitously and now intentionally, but I always loved doodling. I always loved scribbling. I was a big daydreamer. Like I got in trouble. I went to a Catholic elementary school and Episcopal high school. My parents sacrificed almost all of their extra money to put us in really good schools. And I was a daydreamer, and I would doodle all the time. And then one day my guidance counselor said, you really need to look at a career in arts or in architecture. Then that summer I went to work for my uncle, who was a block layer and a bricklayer. He was a mason. And I was 13 years old, turning 14, and all I did all summer is mix cement and lay blocks. Got fascinated with buildings. Then one day the architect drove on the site. I'll never forget this. He drove in on a burgundy Jaguar. And he jumped out. He had on a coat and tie, and he was smoking a cigar. And he sort of walked around the site for 30 minutes, and he was saying to my uncle's boss, who was probably the foreman, all the things that needed to be done. Then he got back in that car. I'll never forget this. He backed up, and he whisked off. And I was sitting there mixing cement at 13. And I looked over and I go, that seems like the job for me. And so when my guidance counselor mentioned architecture, I thought back to that moment. And it's been a wonderful gift for me at 13, 14. From then on, I just kept telling myself, I am going to be an architect. And the skills of daydreaming, the creativity of doodling, the experience around communication, like all those things came to bear because you need all those tools as an architect. And those were not things that someone had to teach me. Those were just things that I had that they needed to cultivate for me.
You've taken the architecture and you've used that as a platform to become CEO of a large diversified firm doing things all over the world. That's not a common background. You don't see a lot of architects that have rose into a CEO of a diversified firm, maybe to an architecture firm, but not to a diversified firm. Why? What was different about you, and what led you to pursue that to kind of expand beyond architecture?
Yeah, see, I have a passion for people. And I think I always say, if you show me what you care about, I'll show you how big you are. And some people only care about their neighborhood. Some people only care about their family. Some people only care about themselves, or in a business, some people only care about the part of the business that they do. I've always had this tremendous passion for people. So when we joined the Beck Group as architects, we were merged into that firm in 1998. I had this fascination with the whole business. So I wanted to know, like, what were the foreman's job? What was the project manager's job? What were the finance people doing? Like, I was just curious about everything. In fact, one of the reasons that I really wanted to be an architect is most architects where I'm from had their own small business. So I always wanted to be in the business. And once we got into this larger firm, I was just fascinated with everything. Then I had a wonderful mentor, first Rick, who was an architect, who kind of saw my passion around people. He said, people really like being with you. That's a leadership trait. So he would just sprinkle me around the projects into different roles and take me into meetings to have different conversations. So at 23, 24, now I'm talking about budgets, talking about finance. I was just curious about all these things. Then a big break happened to me. They needed one young architect to go and lead a sort of group to plant our first office in another location, in my case, Atlanta. So I went there, and as you know, at 27, 28, I was the only person. So now I have to do it all, almost like a startup in a big business. A lot of entrepreneurial skills. So I needed to develop more competencies, but we started winning a lot of businesses. So I was the salesperson, the designer, the project manager. I had to be the guy doing the books of the architecture projects, finance. So then it became clear to me, like, oh, I'm interested in all this stuff, and I want to know more. So I went to this little pocket, finance class at the University of Virginia, at the Darden Business School. It was called, Financial Management for the Non-Financial Manager. Then I got the business bug. So now I'm reading Wall Street Journal, London Times, The Economist. I'm listening to Warren Buffett. Now, as an architect on the weekends, all I'm thinking about is business. How can we grow this business? And we took our business in Atlanta from a $50 million business to a $250 million business in a period of 5 years, me and one other person doing a lot of the leading. And then I said, okay, well, how do we get this to be a better business? And at that time, the CEO of the firm kind of saw a lot of the progress we were making. He said, he said this to me at 30, you could be the next CEO of this company. And I never thought about being a CEO, by the way. But once someone rings that bell in you, you can't unring it. And then I said, what do CEOs do? And, from there, I went back to business school. And I like to tell it this way. When people ask me about my career, I joined Beck as a 23-year-old intern. And by 36, I was the CEO of the whole company.
So what does a CEO do?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is leadership. You show me the leader, and I'll show you the future. So goes the leader, so goes the people. I think you have to have a strong passion for people. In fact, one of the things missing, I think, in corporate America today is when we think about the next quarter and not think about the way that quarter is affecting people's lives. When we think about investments, And when we make people tools and we don't think fully enough, particularly in professional services, about the people we're building, companies are going to struggle. In our business, we're essentially professional services. So we have to build people in order to build these buildings. So I think the first thing the CEO has to do is to have a strong rapport with the entire team, but definitely building a world-class management team, which is a leadership equation. I think you have to have vision. So we have to have a strategy, and people overuse that word, but I'm saying, what is the vision for the future? And it's got to be almost an infinite future. When I think about Beck, I don't think about the next 10 years or not even the next 50 years. I think in centuries. So we have to have a future vision for our company that is long-term and expansive. And then we have to bring that vision back to something that's actionable. So every year at Beck, we have an annual plan that's related to a 10-year plan. And the CEO has to own that. I always say, if we don't make these plans we made come true, they're going to fire me. But I'm going to fire a lot of you along the way first. So the CEO then has to hold people accountable. I know that sounds rough. So leadership, long-term strategy, holding folks accountable.
Have you seen anything change in how you've managed people over the last, call it 15, 20 years?
Oh, absolutely.
And what are those differences?
Yeah, but when the time changes, we have to change. Mm-hmm. When I came into work as a Gen Xer, so at 23, 27 years ago, literally people would just tell you what to do. Hey, Tom, we need you to go to Mississippi. You're going to be leading a food processing plant. Good luck to you. You can't do that today. We've raised a generation, really Tom's generation, has raised a generation that
see, he's going at me.
More,
I do this too.
much more curious, inquisitive, but they're used to much more transparency because of technology tools, the way they've been raised. And by the way, I got news for all of the leaders out there. My kids are 19 and 20. When they come in, they're going to want even more. But this generation we're dealing with today is perhaps, I'm saying the 25 to 40-year-olds who are really our emerging leaders are the most equipped generation we've ever dealt with in America. They have more skills, more tools, more information at their fingertips, and that is the way they have lived their entire life. So today, I think we have to lead with a lot more transparency. We have to lead with a lot more communication. And we have to slow down at the beginning as we develop and also task folks to make sure we have a lot of clarity on long-term purpose as well as short-term activity. And I think that's very different from when I was a 25-year-old. And 25-year-old, they said, hey, you got to go to Atlanta. And here's the package. We'll see you in Atlanta. Today, you have to say to people, here's why going to Atlanta really matters to the firm. Here's why it matters to you. Here's what it might lead to. Here are the steps that we think you can take. You have to slow down and be a lot more transparent. And I think that's a good thing. But I'm not one of the people that complain about the young leaders. I see the brilliance in this next generation. They have some tools and skills that we don't have. And I think they're making us better leaders. I have a lot of 30-year-old mentees in the firm, and I learn a lot from them. Probably more than I can teach them.
One thing that's interesting, and I think it's important for you to touch on too, Beck is an unusual firm. There's a lot of construction firms. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of architectural firms. There's not many that do both architecture and construction. And usually those two players end up being on opposing sides.
Yeah.
Construction complaining about the architecture firm, the architecture firm kind of complaining about the construction firm. How do you make the two of those work? And I know some projects are just architecture for you.
Yeah.
Some are just construction, and some Beck does both the architecture and construction.
Yeah. And it's interesting because now today we have a sort of a blended approach. So even when we're only architects, we're still using our competency in pre-construction and estimating for our architects. And when we're just a builder, we're using our creativity, modeling, design for construction. So we're sort of blending our skills across all of our work. You remember the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus? Well, you can substitute like construction is from Mars and architecture is from Venus. I mean, we're using different kinds of love language in both sides of the profession. I think the way we try to manage across a diverse group of skill set, but also a diverse group of proclivities. I mean, the people that go to architecture school have different competencies, different proclivities, and probably want to live a slightly different life than the people that go to construction school. We have to acknowledge that. So we use a lot of transparency around, strength finders, like what are your strengths, what are your strengths, and then how do we bring them together? We don't spend a lot of time grappling over the, differences. It's just different, but it doesn't mean it's better or worse. And if we can bring those differences together, I think we can make something magical. And so, the first is to allow the architects to be world-class architects. We do not want to dumb our architects down to make our construction folks feel more comfortable. We want our architects to be world-class, best in class. Last year, we won 9 awards. We won the AIA Firm of the Year in Atlanta. Third time we've won AIA Firm of the Year. We won twice in Dallas, now in Atlanta. So we want world-class architecture. And in order to have that, you got to let the architects be architects. And for us, that means cultivating an environment for a lot of creativity and allowing them to do things that maybe even folks who are in an architecture alone firm can't do. So we do sabbaticals for our designers. We do a lot of design retreats. We do all the best-in-class stuff. We got to let the architects be architects. We want the builders to be builders. So we don't want to dumb our quality of construction down to meet some fantastical architecture idea. We've got to hold ourselves accountable. So it's kind of like offense and defense in football. You got to have the offense room, the defense room. Then we have to come together as a team. So we spent a lot of time thinking about what that coming together means. When I became the CEO of the firm, the construction guys were rolling their eyes like, oh my gosh, how can an architect lead $1 billion construction firm? But my COO had come up on the construction side. And I said, we've got to lock arms and we have to understand each other and we have to show folks that we have a common vision, common intent, and a common destination. So we can't get there unless the offense is playing world-class offense and the defense is playing world-class defense. We got to do both in order to win a Super Bowl.
I'm holding Kyle back from jumping into golf and justifying his purchase of the sweater. But before that, I've got to ask you one more question on the kind of the architecture and construction. Both of those industries historically have probably lagged, clearly construction, on the technology side.
Yeah.
Other industries far ahead. How are you kind of addressing the challenges in technology, especially AI when it gets into the architectural side in terms of future potential for people, future opportunities and kind of building it in to reduce and improve productivity in the products you offer on both sides of that?
Yeah. Well, 20 years ago, we bought a software business in London and we built our own estimating software through a company called Beck Tech, which we worked on for 20 years. And we've had a exit with a new investor. That it's been very successful. Many of our construction competitors at Beck are users. Part of the reason we wanted to bring a third-party investor in is to grow it bigger so it could be more competent, but also to give the confidence to our colleagues in other firms who are using it so it's on its way. I think we've always been interested in technology as a nexus and a way to bring transparency between architecture and construction, not only in cost estimating, but also modeling, parametrics. We were doing all of this 20 years ago. So I think we embrace the future. There's no doubt that AI will take out a lot of mundane jobs in both construction and architecture. We have a whole group at Beck that just, are sort of a skunk work groups that are just experimenting with that. Of course, we have to put boundaries on how we use machine learning now. Many of our clients don't want their information out there in a banal way. So we have a lot of, sort of routinization of how you can use it now while still allowing for experimentation. So, the nice thing about a company like Beck is technology has the potential to really create more transparency across the whole delivery of buildings. And because we are doing all of it, gives us the opportunity to find a lot of efficiencies along the way. So as I said earlier, when things change, you have to change. Mm-hmm. And I think you can sit back and fight, or you can say, how do we utilize? I would give you an example. We are designing a very large hotel for a best-in-class brand, a world-class brand. You would know it, a house name, one of the better ones. And, we'd spend weeks coming up with conceptual, designs to just sort of gauge where they wanted to go. We can now do that in a weekend using AI and machine learning, and we can pump out so many more scenarios. And I would say the interesting thing, though, is while we can move through our work product quicker, the bandwidth on the human brain and the human emotion has not changed. So we can actually develop concepts and presentations more hastily, but the client still needs the time they need to digest all of this information. And so on the one hand, I think it will make a lot of what we do easier, but on the other hand, it has the potential to make it far more complex by giving too many options. So we are having this conversation on insight versus information. We got so much more information and the ability to pump out so much more information, but ultimately clients are hiring us for insight, and we need to be able to smartly digest all of these options. And so I'm very excited. I think about the next 15 years of my career. I'm expecting radical change, and the companies that are willing to change are going to be the ones that win. When I entered my first job in architecture in 1995, there were no computers on anyone's desk. There were drafting boards, electric erasers.
That's only 30 years.
Pencils. I had a beautiful hand lettering. We lettered everything. We had stencils. That was 30 years ago. And so, we've gone through the change of automated CAD drafting. We've gone through the change of internet. I mean, I remember we had one computer in 1997. We had one computer that everyone could go to and use the internet. We were still faxing things in 97. I feel like I'm a young 50, but that is literally how we worked in 1997. So I'm very confident that the change that's coming can be positive for our industry. I'm also confident that, at Beck, we will address the challenge and utilize the change, and I'm excited about it.
Show them your expertise in golf.
No, I don't know if there is any. Not compared to your game. Okay, so president of the USGA, got a 3-year term starting, I think, spring of 23. Executive committee starting in 2019. I think you picked up the game, call it 10, 12, maybe 14 years ago. Talk to me about how influential the game of golf has just been in your life these last, call it 10, 15 years. What was the impetus to go serve with USGA? And then we'll get into the other things you've done.
Yeah, I mean, we have this saying, living the golf life. And the people who are living the golf life know what that means. It means you don't take vacations. You don't take a week off unless there's a golf course somewhere to play. You think about golf, other than your family and your work. You probably think about golf as much, and sometimes it might be competing with those other things. I mean, golf has become an integral part of my life. And I think it takes that level of intensity and commitment to the game, to actually lead the game. The USGA leads more than half of the world's golfers, and it's a big responsibility. Golf was, for me, something in my career that I just messed around with at, corporate scrambles until I became CEO. And when I came back to Dallas in 2013, I was very isolated because all of my peers in the business were no longer peers. And then I didn't know many people in the city because we had been in Atlanta for 11 years. And so I joined this club, Northwood, and it became kind of a little oasis for me where I could make new friends and be with peers, which I desperately needed since all my friends in the firm no longer viewed themselves as peers. And I would sit at Northwood and have my lunches, and I'd look out, and all these guys seemed to be enjoying golf, and I was like a full member, and I was paying for their golf. And so I said, gosh, they don't look that athletic, relative to the athletes I grew up with. If they can do it, I can do it too. And so I like to say I came into golf right at the top at a private club with a professional instructor, and we used to joke. So I started taking lessons in April, I believe April of 2014, and I wrote a journal. I still have the journal, and I titled the journal "Road to Scratch," and that's still the way I describe my golf game. I'm on the road to scratch, and it's been a wonderful place of friendship, of camaraderie, but it's also been this code. If you how a person behaves on the golf course, indicates so much about what you can expect from them in life. A guy who cheats in golf sometimes cheats in life all the time.
Yeah.
A person who cannot conduct themselves properly in the environment of golf, and that's how you treat the staff, how you treat the course, how you treat fellow players. If you can't conduct yourself well there, you don't conduct yourself well anywhere. And the integrity that it takes to play golf, to call the balls and strikes on yourself, to write down the right score. You know, I made a 5, I made a 6, to call out your score. You know, it just, there's so much about golf in terms of internal operating system that is good for your life. This is why at the USGA we're trying to spread the game to, you know, communities who have not traditionally benefited from the game, because we think this game literally can change your life.
When one of those initiatives have been the U.S. Adaptive Open. So talk about how that came to be and where you're taking that.
Yeah, well, we think, again, our job is to spread the game of golf and inspire people into a better life through golf. There are all these folks who, have, physical limitations, but we think the game can be a great place for them to have recreation, to develop friendships, to test themselves, to be the best version of themselves. We wanted to also inspire all other golfers through inspiring that community. It's been a very important initiative, that has occurred in my time on the board. And I think it was not a slight that the USGA was the first national championship for, adaptive golf. We now have it in the UK, and we now have many state championships. But we wanted to fling open the game to this group of folks. And when you go to that championship, it's really cool because we have different categories. We have folks that have mental challenges. We have folks that are not able-bodied. We have, folks that have lost sight. There are many different categories. And to see the level of excellence that they approach the game with is inspirational to all of us. So again, if you believe like I do that this game can change your life, then you'd want more people to benefit and enjoy the game. And that was probably our biggest purpose behind the Adaptive Open.
Let's talk about the state of golf. So in the last 5 years, we've seen enormous growth in the game of golf. Female golfers up 41%, youth 48%, Black Americans playing golf up 123%.
Yep.
Gone from a little bit below 500 million rounds a year to nearly 550 million rounds a year. At the same time, though, we've seen reduction in the number of golf courses, significant decline in that. What's the state of golf? Because you, when you came into USGA, said, I want to make golf look more like America.
Yeah.
Are we doing it?
Yeah, look, your numbers are impressive. And according to the National Golf Foundation, going into 2019, 29 million people in America identified themselves as golfers. Today, that number is almost 49 million. So almost 20 million people through COVID and through, all of the, changes in the way we live have joined the game. And the good news is 50% of that 20 million are young people of color and women. So the very people we've been asking to come to the game of golf have showed up. And it's time for us to fling the gates open and to sort of bear hug those people so they know that they're wanted and welcomed in this great game of ours. I do think the limitations on how many people golf and how often people can golf are twofold, and they're very simple. It's access to golf courses and the cost that it takes to play golf. And included in that cost is the time. So at the USGA, we're investing in many more places to play. Every time we have a US Open, we invest in a municipal course to make it bigger, to make it more expansive, to increase the quality, but also to leave an endowment to lower the cost for those that live in that community, so we open up more access. And then we're also, investing in these small places to play, so you should expect to see the USGA sponsor many little places to play in parks, at Boys and Girls Clubs, at YMCAs, to just let regular kids get a club in their hand and to experience the game on their terms. We've been asking people for too long to come to the game of golf. So we want you to leave your community and come into the game of golf. It's now time for us to take the game of golf into the community. And it's nice when, the moment arises and the moment arrives and you have a life story that matches the moment. And so I hope, just in any little small way, my experience in golf as a fairly new golfer, not many USGA presidents have been golfers for less than 12 years. Not many USGA presidents grew up not playing golf. I've been the first USGA president who is a black person. I've been the first USGA president from the state of Texas. There's a lot of things about my experience not living my whole life in golf that helps me see more clearly the brilliance of golf. It's interesting because if you've grown up in this game, there might be things you take for granted. It is very special to all my colleagues. You know, my successor, Kevin Hammer, is one of my best friends. But his father was a golf professional, and Kevin darn near plays like a professional. And so I have learned so much from him about the traditions of the game that it would be hard for me to know unless I had the deep experience he did. But I hope in some ways he learns some things from me in terms of a person who spent their life outside of the game looking in and now gets to live inside. And I think that's the magic when we can bring the best of all those experiences to bear. So I hope these little kids, when they look at the U.S. Open and they, look into the game, that they actually see a place for themselves in the game.
Let's kind of, to use the construction term, take a backhoe and go a little bit deeper on this, because the USGA's kind of got a twofold purpose. One, it's to steward the game, which largely is a traditional piece, the 18-hole courses, et cetera. But it's also the governing body, determining the rules, which again falls into that. But if we look at those numbers, some of those that we just talked about, last 5 years, number of people playing golf is up 57%, but on courses up 16%. So there's a lot of that that's gone into simulators, Top Golfish, the sort of examples that you used with First Tee, parks for kids that's not the traditional 18-hole course, that sort of thing. So where does all of that play relative to USGA? Is that just a feeder into eventual, or is it going to be a completely different play?
Well, I think yes and. I mean, I love Top Golf. I love all these alternative off-site golf. In many ways, it's solving a problem that golf has, which is we need people to have an opportunity to test drive golf. But I don't care who you are. If you are a passionate golfer, you remember the first time you nailed a driver square on the sweet spot. You remember the first time you nipped a wedge perfectly or you made a 10-foot putt. And it didn't have to be on an 18-hole golf course. It's the electricity that runs through your body. It's the adrenaline and the exhilaration. It's the flight of the ball, which is kind of like the flight one takes in life. It's all those things that attracts people to the game. And if we can lower the barrier of entry through these off-site mechanisms to get people golf interested, I think that's a really good thing. And then once people get on their golf journey, we have to have easier pathways for people to continue that journey into the traditional game, because it's not enough to leave them, sort of on the outside of the traditional game. We think the core traditional game offers so many benefits to your life that we want people to have a pathway into that game. So I say yes and, or yes and yes. People say, what do you say to the guy in the cutoff T-shirt banging balls at the Top Golf? I say yes to that guy. And I want to gently put my arms around his shoulders and walk him to the edge and say, there's a benefit for learning how to dress really nice like a golfer. There's a benefit for learning to take your cap off inside and looking someone in the eyes and shaking their hands. There's a benefit on learning how to add up all your scores. There's a benefit in learning the rules. There's a benefit on the integrity that it takes and the decorum that it takes. Those things that are good for the traditional game of golf are going to be great for your life. And particularly for people who have not had the benefit of this experience, it has the opportunity to actually give them a bigger springboard in life than folks who have grown up in that opportunity. And that's the gift that we think we can deliver back to all Americans, but particularly underserved Americans through the game of golf.
Talk to me about the innovation side of golf. So the golf ball is a very hot topic at this point. Has the technology gone too far? Are the players hitting it too far and call it outreaching some of these courses, even the courses that are stretching 7,200, 7,300, 7,400 yards? And is that potential rollback, positive for the game?
Yeah, I think it's when we talk about this issue, I think it's important to not talk about it like someone has done something wrong. Like everyone's done their job. The equipment manufacturers have innovated. They have benefited from better manufacturing processes, better materials, better technology, and they have created better equipment. So they've done their job. The athletes have done their job. I mean, 25 years ago, there was maybe a handful of athletes that looked like NFL players. Today, many of them look like professional athletes. So they have tuned their bodies, tuned their shape. They have physio, nutrition, cardio. They've got it all. They've built better bodies and better golf swings. So they've done their job. The agronomist has done their job. We have much better turf graft that requires less water, that can be mown tighter and greened up quicker, and therefore the material and the presentation of golf courses is at an all-time high. So everyone has done their job, but it's now time for the governing body to do its job. And it's time for someone to speak for the golf course, to say that building bigger golf courses to contain further ball flight, to actually obsolete the best places in golf because we lack the courage to put a restrictor plate on equipment is not good for the game of golf. Bigger golf courses mean more time. It means more cost. We literally are excluding people from the game because they can't afford the cost and the time that it takes to play golf.
Well, the average golfer hits it 200 yards change versus the pro.
To accommodate 0.0001% of golfers. We're literally going to blow up golf courses, move bunkers, change tees, spend billions of dollars renovating golf courses to accommodate maybe 2,500 men that play professional golf and maybe another 10,000 elite championship golfers. It is not responsible. It's not morally right. And so 20 years ago, we should have identified that the single solid core hard shell ball would change the distances that golf balls could travel. We should have identified that metal drivers, fine-tuned year after year, would threaten the sustainability of these wonderful cathedrals of golf that we've become accustomed to. And I think it's a moral responsibility, if you care about this game the way we all do, to say that at some point we have to put limits on what we're willing to do.
But then is that saying then, and again, the USGA came out with this, but the tour came out against it, manufacturers came out against it. Are we saying they're not interested in the real strength of the game long term?
Well, look, again, everyone's doing their job, okay? The USGA and the R&A, along with Augusta National, we conduct 3 of the majors. We have no financial interest in equipment manufacturing, golf course construction, or ball sales. We have no financial interest in any of this. We have no conflicts of interest. No one pays us to do this. In fact, we volunteer our time and spend countless amounts of our own resources in order to help represent the interest of all golfers. And it would be a shame if we allowed the interest of a very small group of people to override the interest of 100 million people. And what I'm saying to you is we think about golf 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And on average, tour players are hitting the golf ball 1 yard further every year. So just extrapolate it out. You watch the Rocket Mortgage Classic this week. The winner hit some drives 370 yards. Yeah. Now, he may be a world-class athlete, but he is not significantly more athletic than the athletes a generation before him. What has changed is the construction of the golf ball and the manufacturing of the golf clubs. And it would be a shame if we keep building and consuming more land and making golf courses bigger and bigger and more expensive and more time-consuming to accommodate such a small group of golfers at the expense of the interest of 100 million and potentially more golfers.
And Fred, you and I have talked about this, but maybe important, and I'll try to get it right, and I know you'll correct me. But what you're trying to do is address the speed of the ball, which has
at the very top end.
At the top end,
which has no impact.
And that's where I was going. Which has little impact on you and I. It might have impact on him.
If you swing at less than 120 miles per hour, the changes we are describing have no impact on you. Yeah. So I have my friends come up to me and they said, "Oh, Fred, is this going to..." Buddy, you swing your driver at 96 miles per hour. You can hit any golf ball and it would not make a difference. What we're saying is, based on the physics of the golf ball, there is something called the trampoline effect, which says that when you hit golf balls with extreme speeds, you get an exponential swing impact that you don't get at regular swings. The overall distance standard, I don't want to get too technical on this, the ODS, said that at 120 miles per hour swing speed, a golf ball shouldn't travel more than 300 yards in the air. Today, the top 15% of golfers on tour swing it much faster than that. So we have to go to that top end speed and limit the effect of the trampoline spring effect on the golf ball at the extreme speeds, so we make a more reasonable ball flight so that we don't have to spend billions of dollars in the game of golf every year tearing up golf courses.
I think it's long overdue, and I admire the USGA for doing it. But why push it so far out? You did a marvelous job, Fred, of articulating the issue and the challenge in front of us. But yet there's still a good time before we'll actually see those changes come about.
Yeah.
And during that period of time, there's going to be a lot of those courses that are going to be changed.
Well, the time is not as far out as you think. We'll implement in 2028, the new golf ball will be implemented in the U.S. Open and the Open Championship, most likely in the Masters as well. I don't want to speak for them. All three of us have already committed to go to that new golf ball. And then in 2030, all golfers will be required to go to that golf ball. Since the very beginning of the USGA, and even before that, the RNA, we have been designated the responsibility to govern the game of golf and to set rules. Now, everyone will have their own decision to make as to whether they want to play by the rules of golf. But we have gone through our protocols. We have been collaborative and integrated everyone's ideas. We have made massive amounts of compromises along the way. Our original proposal was for an elite ball only for professionals. I would add that only in golf do professional golfers play the same equipment that you and I do. Our first standard was to say, let's not touch the regular golfer's equipment. In fact, I've seen most of my buddies play. They need even more help with their equipment. But that was our first idea. And then the PGA of America, the PGA Tour, and the equipment manufacturers asked us not to bifurcate the equipment, that they want to make one set of equipment. It was their idea. They say, if you do that, we would go along with you. And we did. And now that we've come up with this solution, which was heavily driven by their input, they're still balking. So what they really want us to do nothing. And doing nothing is no longer an option. Because we should not tear down Yankee Stadium and blow up Fenway Park and demolish Wimbledon because we lack the courage to regulate the flight of the tennis ball and the baseball. Every other sport deals with this issue. When athletes in basketball shot the three more consistently from a closer distance, they moved the three-point line back. When football players started, pummeling each other, they changed the helmet. They changed the shoulder pads. They outlawed,
moved the goalposts.
They moved the goalposts. They outlawed how hard you can hit and when you can hit. Yep. They moved the punting back. We have to make rules that actually keep the sport in a great shape. And I don't do this, and we don't do this because we're coming from a place of bad intent. We do this from a place of love and a place of respect for all golfers and for the interests of the game 50 years from now. And I do not expect my colleagues who are professional golfers today who are thinking about making the next cut to have the time and patience to think about the game 50 years from now. That's not their job. That is our job. And when you look back throughout time, I would like it to be said that this group, this generation who were charged with leadership, had the courage to take on a very unpopular issue and to do what's right for the long-term health of the game.
So I want to do one question for the ultimate golf enthusiast real quick. You talk about golf cathedrals, and you come off a very successful U.S. Open at Oakmont, which I think any golf enthusiast that would be top of their bucket list. You've got the Walker Cup this upcoming fall at Cypress Point. You've now got a rotation actually set up with Pinehurst number 2 and I think a couple other courses that are rotation for the U.S. Open. Talk to me about how you see even greater access, even just on TV, to these great golf cathedrals. I think a Philly Cricket Club that was utilized by the PGA Tour this spring. Talk to me about how you see that continuing to open up for the viewer and the player to get to enjoy.
Yeah, I think the USGA, we think it's a responsibility to share these wonderful places in golf with the golfing public. We have to run extraordinarily good championships. We have to be good for these host sites so that they trust us to actually, open their place up to the public and to, demonstrate how good these places can do. When we start to tackle this issue coming off of 1 or 2 U.S. Opens that were not as strong, we came up with a couple frameworks that we think, very much we would use in our, careers as builders and as business leaders, that we wanted a, sort of framework for how we should go forward. And with the U.S. Open, we wanted to go fewer places more frequently so that we could make deeper investments.
The Pinehurst, the Oakmonts.
Pinehurst, Pebble, Oakmont, but also Marion, Wingfoot, Shinnecock. You'll see a rotation of the best. And the first thing that drove that was the players. The players, Nick Price was on our board at the time. He said, it's very important where a player wins this U.S. Open. So we went to the players and we asked them, if you could have 8 U.S. Open sites, what would they be? And as you can imagine, 6 or 7 of them were consistent in everyone's questionnaire. So we're going to go to those places more frequently, but we'll also be longer-term partners so that we can make deeper investments. And if the U.S. Open is a one-off, if you think we're only coming this one time and we won't be back and you don't know when we'll be back, then your willingness to make deep investments and to monetize those investments over one U.S. Open are very limited. But if you know we'll be coming back 4 or 5 times and we have predictability in revenue and we have predictability in revenue, we have a common agreement, then we can go much deeper. And as we all know in business as leaders, 20% of our customers might be responsible for like 80% of our success. And so the ability to actually focus and filter and go deeper in fewer places is an opportunity to increase the quality for the player, but also for the fans and also the host site, and to make a much more consistent championship. So Oakmont, we built a new driving range. We built a new road. We acquired property for parking. We literally improved the fan and player experience at this U.S. Open because we know we'll have 4 more U.S. Opens. Right. And that parking lot did not have to be monetized over one of them. That driving range we can think of long-term. But here's the thing. When we get more clarity, we get more confidence. But so does the state. So do our corporate partners. Yeah. And they're willing to go deeper with us too, because that clarity creates so much more confidence.
And for this is a major change in strategy for the USGA. And clearly being president, you had a role in it. But I think you were actually chairman of the committee.
Championship committee,
committee that put this in place. So to kind of, at a time when there's experimentation with Erin Hills, with Chambers Bay, et cetera, those sorts of things, which I think are the ones you're talking about, were not viewed as successful as the Oakmonts, the Pinehurst, the Shinnecocks, et cetera. That was a strategy to go back that you really put in play during your time as chairman of that championship committee.
Yeah, I think, look, we shouldn't experiment with the U.S. Open. And I'm very proud of Chambers Bay and our championships there and Erin Hills. We just had a wonderful U.S. Women's Open. Mm-hmm. So this is no slight to them. But I think for us, it just means having more repetition and having more, sort of confidence and having more recurring events is a better strategy. Like, we should probably have a multitude of championships at a golf course before we have a U.S. Open there. We should probably have many opportunities to sort of, test drive how the course would be set up and how the fans would work before we bring our biggest, event there. So I just think it's, a lot of what we learn in our business, we're just applying to golf. And there's a whole group of folks working on this strategy, at the championship committee level. Our chief championships officer, John Bodenhammer, was very instrumental in this. But, what we're also doing is we have staff and team members and teammates who will also be recurring. So they're getting so much more expertise and confidence.
And know the courses.
It's a complete succession planning move. It's a complete leadership move. It's just so much more quality. So that's the U.S. Open. And then at the Walker Cup and Curtis Cup and every championship, we have a framework. For instance, at the Walker Cup, we think America has some wonderful cathedrals of golf that are not appropriate to host U.S. Opens. And we want to take the Walker Cup and the Curtis Cup to those cathedrals so that we open
just can't
those
handle
up.
the crowds,
they just can't handle the crowd. So, but we want to open and share those little jewels with the rest of the golfing public. And so Seminole and National and Chicago Golf and Cypress Point
great
and
courses.
And all of these wonderful places that many golfers in the country, based on what those places are, might never get the opportunity to play them. But we can open the gates and share through the broadcast and through the fan experience these wonderful golfing places with the public. And we think we have an opportunity, but we also think we have a responsibility. And the USGA is well positioned to do this. So I'm very excited about Oakmont, probably the stiffest test in golf. And then Cypress Point, maybe the most beautiful place in golf as a, 2025 championship book. And of course, we're going to Olympic and we're going to Bandon Dunes and we're going to Erin Hills. We're going to many great places in American golf. And that's the exciting part of, what the USGA does.
I think you've done a great job. I think that there's an opportunity to take that shift in strategy and articulate it more. I think the golfing community would appreciate it. And clearly you articulate it so well. I hope you'll be involved years in advance. You're not responsible for the professional game. But nevertheless, with all of the great numbers that we've talked about, the boom in golf and that, there is one that's turned south significantly, and that's the viewership of golf on television. Save this year's Masters, we're seeing double-digit declines in viewership, largely because of the PGA split with Live Golf. Not to look at and kind of do a compare and contrast with those two, but looking at it from the overall strength and benefit and view of golf in general, how do you look at that split and where do you hope it plays out?
Yeah. Well, I obviously, as a USGA president, I have to be careful, and how deep I go into others' business. But I would talk in the context of a golf fan. Mm-hmm. I think golf fans like to see the best players play against each other. Mm-hmm. And sadly, because of the split, the only place they get to see that now is at the majors. Maybe at the Ryder Cup, one or two Live players may qualify. I think it's a better thing when everyone is together, and I hope they'll get it figured out. But I also would note that the history of golf, though, has been multiple tours. And if you looked at golf when it was very strong in the 70s and 80s, there was a European tour. Of course, the world was a much bigger place then. But you had wonderful players from all around the world coming to our majors who played on different tours. So golf has been through this before, and I think and I hope they'll find a pathway back together. But it's not my, purview to tell them how. I can't see, exactly how it plays out, but I have a feeling just because of the golfing public and its priority and premium on watching the best players play together, that eventually they'll find their way back together. So what we have tried to do at the USGA is express our values, which we feel like it doesn't matter where you play, where you came from, the color of your skin, the shirt on your back. If you can get the ball in the hole, you can play in USGA championships. And that's always been the history of the USGA, to identify the best players. And we have, from the very beginning, expressed our values, which is the ultimate thing about being Americans who golf is the meritocracy involved with golf. And We had African Americans playing in our championships from the very beginning. We had women playing in our championships almost from the very beginning. At the U.S. Amateur, we had a women's amateur. First women's amateur, I believe, in the history of golf. So from the very beginning, we've been about all Americans. And I feel very proud that that's something we are doing more full-throatedly these days.
That's right.
Fred, it's been terrific being with you. I think if you look at the successes in your career and think back over the last couple of minutes in your conversation, it's very easy to see that. You see the leadership, you see the passion, you see the commitment, and also comes out that work ethic that you talked about, working harder than anybody else. And I can identify with that. At 50 years old, as you look back on your career, are there any accomplishments or achievements singular that are real special to you that you look back? And I guess said a different way, looking over kind of the next 20 years, what do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah. So it's funny because I had my university reached out this year and they wanted to give me a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I said to our marketing department, I would not accept that award because I'm in the middle of my race. And I don't think you start thinking about your trophies in the middle of your race. I want to keep running hard. Many friends ask me, how could you run back and also, lead the USGA? That's a common question I get. The people who expect the most need to be willing to do the most. I don't spend many time on my couch, watching movies. I watch far less sports. I'm working. And this is all my work. The work that I do at the USGA in golf is no different from my work at Beck. They're the same thing. We're trying to build a better world for more people. And we can do that through our company, and we can do that through golf. My clients are my friends. The work I'm doing is leading me toward the life I want. So when I think about those special accomplishments, I think about building a better Beck. We have a bigger company, but we have a company that has always been good for people. I think we're doing more of that. We have a game that is thriving and including a lot more people. I hope we did a little part in that. My mother passed away at a hospital in the Bahamas because they didn't have an ICU. Our company was able to go to the Bahamas and build a new hospital. Very proud of that. So all of these things are a part of the work. Whether you're building a building to save lives, building a better game of golf so that people can experience a more joyful life, or building a company that would help people achieve their dreams, I don't separate any of those things. It's all the work. And hopefully my kids feel like they've been involved in all of this, and my wife too. So we integrate all that together, and we spend no energy separating the work we do in golf versus the work we do in our community, Citizens Council. Very proud of the things we did in COVID there, the work we do at Beck. It's all one work. And I'm never stressed. But if you want more, you have to be willing to do more. And that is the way I look at it. I didn't have to take anything away from Beck in order to serve the USGA. In fact, because I've served the USGA, I think we have a better Beck. And I think that's a great, message for young people. If your passion can be your work, and your work can integrate into your passion, not only are you going to have a better job and a better career, but you're going to find that you have a much better life.
You layered it in. You took your education to architecture, successful architecture, added in the CEO responsibilities of a large firm, added in responsibilities of a large, highly visible nonprofit, the USGA. You've still got a long runway. Anything else you want to achieve? Any other piece out there, public work that you want to do, any other charitable, anything else kind of on the radar screen?
Yeah. One of the things I've learned, raising two daughters, I always joke about this. Like when my kids were young, I used to like to kind of steer them on things I thought they should be doing. But what I've learned from them, I have two daughters, 19 and 21. I've learned that the best way to lead them is very similar to leading yourself. You have to hold on, but you have to hold on gently. Like sometimes life actually takes you where you need to go. And when you're holding on with tight hands and clenched fists, you don't have the flexibility to go where life really should take you. And so when I think about beyond the USGA, what's next, it's clear to me that I've developed this wonderful capacity to do more. I want to apply some of that capacity back into Beck. But I also want to remain open to the unknown future, to see where golf takes me, to see what leadership might be required both in our home community and in our country, and to think about what more will Beck and my family need from me. I could not have dreamed 10 years ago about being a USGA president. In fact, 10 years ago, I didn't know what the USGA was. So there's a lot of times where I think you need to be open, you need to be curious, and you need to be preparing yourself for when the opportunities come. And then, isn't it a gift if we can walk around and hold on to what we love, but hold on to it gently and just let it take you where it should? That's how I'm thinking about the next few years.
Thanks for being with us, Fred.
This was great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.